By the time we get to the 8th century, the 700s BCE, Greece experienced a population explosion. For example, the population of the city of Athens quadrupled over the course of 60 years in the 8th century. We're not totally sure why. Certainly some of those peoples who had taken up a nomadic way of life started settling down, but this only accounts for a small portion of the increase in population. It's possible that climate change was improving agricultural turnout. It's also possible that increased trade from places like Phoenicia was giving better access to more consistent and healthier food supplies. Indeed, as evidence of this interaction, the Phoenician alphabet first appears in Greece around the year 800 BCE. They were clearly plugged into the wider Mediterranean world by the time we reach the 8th century. This is the beginning of what we call the Archaic Age amongst the Greeks. During this time, villages within Greece grew into city-states. In Greek, these city-states were called a polis, P-O-L-I-S. And most of these cities were governed by aristocratic councils, very much like the Phoenician governments that had been set up in the various colonies of the Mediterranean. That is to say, they weren't governed simply by kings. During this archaic period, literacy rapidly spread amongst the Greeks, and a new form of fighting developed, something called the Phalanx. These were heavy infantry soldiers, so they were wearing heavy bronze armor, who would fight in tight formation. And it should be noted, these aren't the aristocrats who were fighting amongst these phalanxes. The aristocrats were still primarily on horseback. These were the middle class of the Greeks. They were commoners. And as commoners became more important within war, they became more important within governing their own city-states, their own polis. Within a couple of generations after the population boom, overcrowding started to become a problem amongst these Greek city-states. There wasn't enough land for fathers to pass on to their sons, and starting around the year 750 BCE, the Greek city-states started sending out colonies, very much like the Phoenicians had been doing for 400 years before that. The Greeks colonized the coast of Anatolia, the coastal line around the Black Sea, Italy, and parts of modern-day southern France. You'll also notice that they set up a colony within Egypt. By the time we get to the classical period, many Greeks will see the Egyptians as the source of their cultural heritage. Now, these colonies maintained close ties with their mother cities, but they weren't underneath the control of the mother cities. For example, the city-state of Athens sent out a lot of colonists to the Anatolian coast, in an area called Ionia, just south of Lydia here. It was these Ionian Greek city-states that would later on rebel against the Persians, and because of the close connection between Athens and its colonies, Athens helped out, causing the Persians to seek revenge against the Athenians and their fellow Greeks. This population boom and the increasing complexity of Greek city-states led to a complexity of Greek intellectual thought. By the 6th century, Greek philosophers were looking for the logic of nature. These are people that we refer to as philosophers. The movement actually started within Ionia, and it spread to the entire Greek world. They were thinkers who wanted to understand the logic of nature without using any mythical explanations. They came up with the first articulation of atomic theory, when they were trying to figure out what the basis of reality was. Philosophers like Democritus articulated the idea of the smallest possible forms of matter. A group known as the Pythagoreans developed mathematics to a much higher level. You might remember the Pythagorean theorem from high school math. This focus on mathematics led the Pythagoreans to believe that the universe was actually speaking to humanity through the language of math, and that it was showing that all things are interconnected. This growth in intellectual thought, combined with the democratization of war, led some city-states to begin to develop democracy by the end of the 6th century BCE, so the 510s or so. Most famously, the city of Athens went on this notion of democracy whole hog. The people of Athens got to vote on when they went to war, what laws would be enacted, whether or not to kick out members of their city that they thought didn't have the city's best interest at heart. And in a very clear demonstration of what direct democracy really means, they voted in all of their generals, and they voted on such things as death penalty cases for their fellow citizens. In the early 5th century, and so in the 490s, the Greek colonies on the Ionian coast of Anatolia rebelled against the Persians. Athens sent ships to help, but they didn't send enough help, and those Greek city-states were thoroughly defeated. So Persia decided to cross into Greece in order to make them pay for helping out their colonies. These Persian wars of the early 5th century BCE are what gave Greeks a unified sense of identity. Up until this point, there was no sense of unified Greekness. After the Persian Wars, the Greeks certainly saw themselves as a people separate from the outside world. As a matter of fact, they had a special word for people who were not Greeks, who spoke in languages that they thought sounded like everybody was saying bar, 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 bar. They called them barbarians. The city-state of Athens made a lot of money off of running the alliance that the Greek city-states had formed to fight back against the Persians. And by being the head of this alliance, they were able to make money flow into their city. Athens became the center of art and philosophy. The philosopher Socrates, who lived during the late 5th century BCE, advocated for understanding our world by simply asking questions. His student, a man named Plato, who worked in the early 4th century BCE, argued that our reality is just a shadow of some perfect reality, and that even that perfect reality was simply a shadow of something that flowed from a single source, something he called the One. Plato's student, Aristotle, argued that our reality is actually only what physically exists. It is something that can be measured. In many ways, Aristotle was a proto-scientist. Now, during this period of the Greek classical age, the 5th through 4th centuries BCE, there were plenty of wars between the different Greek city-states. While Athens maintained a large alliance that it made money off of, most Greek city-states saw themselves as completely independent and autonomous. Just north of Greece, another group of Indo-European speakers, a group of folks known as the Macedonians, took advantage of all this infighting. By the end of the 4th century BCE, a man named King Philip II of the Macedonians had conquered all of mainland Greece. And as he conquered, he added those Greek phalanxes to his army. After he completed his conquest, he was getting ready to attack Persia to expand his kingdom, when he was killed by his bodyguard, and his 20-year-old son, Alexander, took over. Alexander was a military genius. He combined the power of Greek heavy infantry phalanxes with the power of the Macedonians' heavy cavalry, and he himself was a fierce warrior. He was a commander who led from the front, not the rear. In the year 334 BCE, he set off to defeat the Achaemenid Persians, and he actually ended up defeating a lot more than Persia itself, attacking up into Central Asia, and even attempting to make a foray into South Asia before his troops said enough was enough and demanded that he turn around and go home. On his way home, he was staying in the old palace of Nebuchadnezzar II in Babylon, where he mysteriously died in 323 BCE. While he was a great warrior in general, he wasn't necessarily a good ruler. After he died, his generals split up his empire between them. A group known as the Antigonids took over Greece, the Seleucids took over Persia, and the Ptolemies took over Egypt. The most important consequence of Alexander's conquests was the interweaving of Greek culture with Egyptian and Persian cultures, forever tying Greek culture to the cultures of West Asia. This ushers in what we call the Hellenistic Period, that Greekish period, which lasted from 323 BCE to 31 BCE.